The Mexico-U.S. Follies, 1846 to 1848.
Back in 1830, Mexico had just finished kicking the Spanish back home after a violent party that lasted over a decade. The result? They won their independence. The problem? The country was now a certified hot mess. If you looked at a map from that time, Mexico was a giant. We're talking an extra large-sized Mexico, stretching far and wide, one of the biggest nations on Earth. But this was the new money that went broke right after inheriting the cash. After 11 years of war, the national treasury was empty, and trying to manage 4.5 million square kilometers with no money is like trying to drive a bus with no wheels. The country wasn't just facing external threats. Spain was still lurking in nearby Cuba. It was also dealing with internal squabbles. Basically, everyone wanted to be the boss. The Mexican government was so unstable it had a new face every few months, and they were completely unprepared for any international conflict. This turned out to be extremely convenient when a war with the Americans kicked off just 2 decades later. To the north, the United States was in its teenage phase, feeling like it needed to grow. Since breaking up with the British, the nation had bulked up considerably. Their motto was basically, "That land looks nice. Is anyone living there? Oh, you are? Whatever." They had already expanded deep into Native American territories and had just pulled off the deal of the century, buying the massive Louisiana territory from the French for pocket change. Because Mexico was too busy being, well, busy, some regions started thinking about leaving. Texas, in 1836, successfully rage quit, revolted and declared independence. At first, the U.S. was a bit hesitant to annex Texas. The main reason? The northern states didn't want another slave state joining the club and messing up the balance of power. Meanwhile, Mexico was still insisting, "Texas is still ours," and warned that any U.S. attempt to steal Texas would lead to total war. Note, this was a threat Mexico couldn't afford to back up. However, the annexation plan got a green light after the 1844 election. President JamesKPolk, who had campaigned with the slogan, "We must take Texas and Oregon," won. He was also casting greedy glances at California, New Mexico, and the rest of what is now the American Southwest. Polk tried the polite route first. He offered to buy the land from Mexico. Mexico refused flatly. So, Polk moved to Plan B, provocation. He instigated conflict by moving troops into a disputed area between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River. This was a strip of land that both nations had previously recognized as part of Mexico's Coahuila state. Essentially, Polk had his soldiers set up camp in his maybe neighbor's front yard. Tensions exploded when the Texas region was officially annexed by the U.S. on December 29, 1845, becoming the 28th state. Mexico, still salty, refused to recognize either Texas's independence or the U.S. offer to buy the land. This act turned the tension into war. On April 25, 1846, Mexican cavalry, probably tired of seeing American soldiers hanging around, attacked a U.S. patrol in the disputed zone under General Zachary Taylor, killing about a dozen men. They then besieged an American fort. Taylor called for reinforcements and defeated the Mexican forces in the next 2 battles. After these skirmishes, President Polk ran to Congress, pretending to be the victim, and declared, "Our forbearance is exhausted. Mexico has crossed our boundary, invaded our territory, and shed American blood on American soil." That American soil part being the disputed land he had just sent troops into. On May 13th, the U.S. Congress declared war. Mexico, being too disorganized, didn't even issue a formal declaration. The situation was pretty clear. A poorly prepared, internally shattered Mexico versus a rising power that was hungry for land. Mexico was weaker, But the U.S. didn't want to look like a bully. Ulysses S. Grant, a lieutenant at the time, later wrote in his memoirs that the whole purpose of advancing to the Rio Grande was to provoke a fight without attacking first. Very clever. Now, we must discuss a legendary figure, Antonio López de Santa Anna. This man was the embodiment of contradiction. He initially opposed independence, then fought for it. He supported the monarchy, then rebelled against the emperor. He managed to become president of Mexico. 12 non-consecutive terms over 22 years, a record for political chaos. After the U.S. declared war in 1846, a coalition in Mexico overthrew the current president and sought to bring Santa Anna back. The problem was, Santa Anna was in exile in Cuba for previous mistakes. From Cuba, he wrote a letter to Mexico City saying, "I don't care about the presidency, really, but I want to get out of exile and use my military experience to win back Texas for Mexico." President Polk, still hoping to buy the land, decided to make a gamble. He sent secret agents to meet Santa Anna in Cuba. The deal: the U.S. would lift its naval blockade, allowing Santa Anna to return to Mexico. In exchange, Santa Anna would sell all the disputed territory to the U.S. Santa Anna: "Great, I agree." The U.S. lifted the blockade. Santa Anna returned to Mexico and immediately tore up the agreement, took command of the army, and announced he would lead the war against the American invaders. A spectacular double-cross. While this political drama unfolded, the war continued. General Stephen W. Kearny and his army began marching into New Mexico. They arrived in Santa Fe on August 15th and met no Mexican forces. It seemed the local Mexican army hadn't gotten the memo. Kearny casually strolled in, claimed New Mexico for the U.S. without firing a shot, declared himself military governor, set up a temporary legal code, and then left Colonel Sterling Price in charge and continued west to California. Of course, the locals in New Mexico later realized what had just happened and rose up in the Taos Revolt, but the U.S. Army quickly suppressed it. On the Pacific Front, the U.S. Navy was ordered to capture San Francisco Bay. Captain John Fremont, leading an exploration team with a lot of guns, just so happened to be in California. When he heard war had broken out, his group turned back to help. The fleet commander, Stockton, marched into Los Angeles without any trouble on August 13th. The Mexican governor of California, Pio Pico, simply fled. Stockton sent a report to Washington. California is entirely free from Mexican control. Right on cue, General Kearny, the one who just walked from New Mexico, arrived after a grueling trek across the desert. On December 7th, his exhausted troops bumped into 100 Mexican cavalrymen, led by Andres Pico, the governor's brother, at the Battle of San Pascual. This time, the Americans got routed. Kearny was wounded and had to dig in on a hill until reinforcements arrived. After that less-than-friendly welcome, Stockton and Kearny's forces regrouped and defeated the Mexican forces in 2 battles on January 8th and 9th, 1847. The Treaty of Cahuenga was signed, marking the end of the war in California. But the war raged on elsewhere. General Taylor, who Polk was now ignoring, had crossed the Rio Grande. The battle in Monterey was fierce. American soldiers, completely unfamiliar with urban warfare, foolishly marched straight down the wide streets and were picked off one by hidden Mexican defenders on the rooftops. Eventually, Taylor took the city and agreed to an 8-week armistice. Washington was furious, ordering Taylor to break the truce and continue the occupation. On February 22, 1847, Santa Anna, yes, him again, personally led 20,000 troops north to deal with Taylor, who had only 4,600 men. On the way, Mexican soldiers deserted in droves, and by the time they arrived, Santa Anna had only 15,000 exhausted men. Still outnumbering the Americans, Santa Anna demanded their surrender. Taylor refused. The next morning, the Mexicans attacked and nearly broke the American lines. But American artillery saved the day. Just when Taylor thought he was done for, the next day, Santa Anna retreated. He had heard news of another rebellion in Mexico City and decided keeping his job as president was a higher priority. The U.S. Army, which had been on the verge of defeat, suddenly became the winners. President Polk decided not to send Taylor any more troops, afraid Taylor was getting too popular. Instead, he sent a second army under General Winfield Scott by sea to the port of Veracruz to begin an invasion straight into the Mexican heartland. On March 9, 1847, Scott performed the first major amphibious landing in U.S. history. After a siege, Veracruz surrendered. Next target, Mexico City. Santa Anna, after putting down the rebellion in the capital, rushed to set up a defensive position at Cerro Gordo. He hid 12,000 troops and artillery in a narrow pass he was sure Scott would walk into. However, Scott sent his cavalry ahead. The Mexican artillery fired on them, and just like that, gave away their position. The battle began. The Americans won and continued their advance. General Winfield Scott marched into Mexico City. The capital was taken after a series of brutal battles. After American victories at Contreras and Churubusco, peace negotiations began, but quickly fell apart. The Americans won the final battles and occupied the capital. Scott became the military governor of Mexico City. The biggest problem for the Mexican army was desertion. Most soldiers were peasants. They were loyal to their villages and families, not to the generals who had conscripted them. They were starved, sick, poorly equipped, and paid very little. They had few reasons to fight. Now, the U.S. had gone far beyond its original goals. They were occupying Mexico's capital. The question was raised, should we just annex all of Mexico? Many opposed this idea, mainly due to cultural differences and the realization that managing such a chaotic country would be a nightmare. Finally, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848. The U.S. was given control of Texas, officially, Alta California, and New Mexico. In return, Mexico received $15 million, about $443 million today. This amount was only half of what the U.S. had tried to negotiate to buy the lands before the war. Essentially, the U.S. beat Mexico and then forced them to sell the land at a 50% discount. The justification for this bargain price was that since Texas had technically left on its own, Mexico wasn't losing as much. A few years later, the Gadsden Purchase was another land deal, giving the U.S. one more small piece of land and fixing the border as it remains today. Thanks for watching.